The sin of love of the wife. Synopsis. Because of the heartbreak caused by the selfish man, Suwat, Tulya becomes hesitant to fall in love again. This continued until her father required expensive medical treatment. Mrs. Dujduen then proposed that she marry her son, who works as an engineer, in order to avoid women who were only after money and would try to deceive her son. The marriage of the two proceeded happily until one day fate brought Tulya into contact with Mak, a relative of Nattawut. He was both sweet-talking and charming. Will the kindness that her husband has shown her for so long make her change her heart? Please stay tuned. Chapter 1. At a restaurant, two couples were enjoying their dinner together. Once they had eaten their fill, it was time to call the waiter to clear the table. How much is it? Suwat, the boyfriend, asked the waitress, who was using a large calculator to figure out the total. 445 baht, including drinks, she informed him with a smile. Suwat pulled out a 500 baht note and handed it to her. The waitress immediately returned the change. Please come back and visit again, she said. Sure, he replied. But once the waitress walked away, Suwat immediately turned to Tulya, his girlfriend of 5 years. 223 baht and 50 satong each, but I'll just pay 200 for mine. Tulya was taken aback. Today was her birthday, and she had not expected Suwat, the stingy man, to treat her to this meal. She opened her wallet, handed him 300 baht bills, and sarcastically told him not to worry about the change. How kind of you. Thank you, he said. Over the past 5 years, their relationship seemed fine, but Suwat was very tight-fisted. He was stingy not only with her but also with his mother and younger sister. His mother, Kula, had constantly urged him to marry Tulya to reduce the wedding costs. She even jokingly told Tulya that as long as they were dating, there was no need for a dowry. Sujia, his younger sister, would often open shopping bags without asking permission and would take whatever she liked, even asking for things she found appealing. Eventually, Tulya decided that if she ever visited Suwat's house again, she would buy only snacks to avoid buying anything for the others. What, do you remember what day it is today? She asked as they boarded the bus back home. Their houses weren't far apart. Hers was in a side alley, while his was right at the alley's entrance. It's your birthday, Tulya. Well, he remembers, but why is he acting so cold? Tulya thought to herself with a heavy heart. Don't you want to give me something? She asked. His birthday was in early January, and she had used her savings to buy him a 2,000 baht team jersey. But now, on her birthday, he didn't seem inclined to spend a single baht. I have something, but it's at home. Tulya smiled, feeling guilty for having doubted him. When the bus stopped at the end of the alley, they got off and paid the fare, which she had to share with him, even though it was just loose change. Did you buy anything for your family, sister-in-law? Sujia ran up to Tulya, eyeing the phone case she had bought, which was the only thing she needed to replace for her father. What's the matter? Didn't buy anything for your sister? Sujia asked. As time passed, Tulya felt increasingly uncomfortable. Suwat walked into the bedroom, probably to get the gift for her. Tulya smiled at Sujia and shook her head, declining. Maybe next time, Sujia. I forgot today. The 20-year-old girl wrinkled her nose before turning back to the bedroom, which had just a thin wall separating it. A moment later, Suwat emerged, holding something in a bag. Tulya's face lit up as she eagerly reached out for it. What is it? Open it and see. But when she opened it, her heart sank. It was just a cheap knockoff perfume. Suwat looked at her expectantly, as if proud of his choice. Well. Tulya hesitated. I saw it on sale, and I thought it would be perfect for your birthday, he said, sounding proud, which made Tulya mentally calculate the cost. If it had been at full price, it would have been a little over 100 baht, but with the discount, it must have been even cheaper. Sighing inwardly, she forced a smile. Try it, Tulya. I think it suits you. Still, he had the audacity to say that. He was so miserly. Tulya's patience was wearing thin. She stood up, her face cold. Then I'll leave now. Should I walk you home? He asked. No need. I want to get some exercise, she replied, even though her house was nearby. Walking would still work up a sweat, but right now, she just wanted to escape from this miserly man as quickly as possible. Suwat smiled, relieved. All right, it's good. Saves on gas. Yeah, sure. Save all you want, she muttered, clutching the cheap perfume bottle. She could use it to spray her bathroom at home, at least to get rid of cockroaches. "See you, Tulya," Suwat called out as he lay down on the bed. Tulya pressed her lips together and put on her shoes, walking home with no patience left. 5 years. That was enough. She stomped down the paved road until the heel of her shoe broke. Tulya snapped and quickly broke off the other heel, throwing it into the bushes by the side of the road, shouting angrily, "God damn it!" But it felt good to release her frustration, breaking the heel as though it were breaking her heart. From now on, she wouldn't bother having a boyfriend again, especially not someone like Suwat. Staying single would be better. Or maybe she would just find an older, richer man to get back at life. At least she could flaunt some gold in front of her house at the end of the alley. With that thought, she hurried back home. She didn't need to say goodbye, as whether she broke up with him or not, the value of it was all the same. Chapter 2. Today, Mrs. Dujduen is here to look for you, Tulya. As soon as she got home, her mother, Sam Lee, immediately informed her. Mrs. Dujduen was a widow who lent money to villagers, known for her strong personality. "I've never borrowed money from Mrs. Dujduen. Why would she come here?" Tulya was confused. "Well, here's the thing." Sam Lee's face turned serious as her husband, Han, sat nearby. It seemed like an important matter. "Her son, the one studying engineering, came to propose that you marry his son," Sam Lee said. "Ha!" Tulya rolled her eyes between her father and mother. "Her son is very handsome, almost 40, Sam Lee added, as if tempting Tulya like a child with candy. "Right now, there are many young women and older women who are interested in him, so she wants to get it over with and have you marry him." "Ha!" Tulya was still unsure. "They even offered us several 100,000 baht, along with a house and land," Sam Lee added. "Wow!" Tulya was taken aback. "Well, Tulya, will you accept his proposal?" her mother asked anxiously. "Wait a minute." Tulya tried to gather her thoughts, knowing that such proposals often came with hidden dangers. What do you think?" Tulya asked. "He's handsome." "Yes." "He's rich." "Yes." "He has an engineering degree." "Yes." "And many women are surrounding him like a swarm of bees?" "You're exaggerating, Tulya," her mother said, rolling her eyes. "To sum it up, he's great, perfect even, but your mother is rushing to have me, just an employee at a salted egg shop, marry him for hundreds of thousands of baht?" Tulya sighed deeply. "This is scary, Mom, Dad. He could be a psycho or have some other issue," she said. After hearing their daughter speak, Sam Lee and Han began to look worried. "Mom, Dad, what Tulya said does sound scary," Han said. "Yeah, it's scary. So if Mrs. Dujduen comes back, should we just refuse?" Sam Lee asked. "Yeah, we should. Have you heard of the saying? A little loss is hard to avoid, but a big loss comes easy," Tulya quickly added. Her parents agreed immediately. Sigh. "It's good that our daughter is smart. But when will Suwat finally come to propose?" Sam Lee quickly changed the subject. "Stop talking about him." "I broke up with him," Tulya said. "What?" her parents exclaimed in surprise. "He's not right for me." "If he comes by again, just tell him I'm not here," Tulya instructed. After giving her parents the message, she stood up to take a shower but handed them 2 bags. "What's this?" Sam Lee asked. "Here's a case for Dad, and a perfume for Mom," Tulya said. "But I don't wear perfume," Sam Lee replied quickly. "You can use it to spray in the bathroom," Tulya suggested. "Really?" Sam Lee was surprised. Tulya left her parents behind and went into her room, gathering the few things Suwat had bought for her over the years. After counting, she realized there were only 7 items, each of which had little value. It was a good thing they had broken up. The next morning, just before she left for work at the salted egg shop, Mrs. Dujduen's luxurious car pulled up next to her father Han's old motorcycle. Sam Lee immediately waved her husband over to consult him. "Why is Mrs. Dujduen here so early? Who's that with her?" Sam Lee asked, glancing at the young man beside her. "Seems like someone who looks like her." "Let me see." Han squinted, as his eyesight wasn't as good anymore. The two exchanged looks. "Could it be?" They peeked through the window. Mrs. Dujduen, dressed in a purple outfit with shimmering fringes, walked up the stairs with a handsome young man beside her. "Sam Lee. Sam Lee. Han. Are you home?" Mrs. Dujduen called out as she reached the door. The couple emerged with forced smiles. "Ah, Mrs. Dujduen. Hello." Sam Lee greeted warmly. "Come on up. Who did you bring along?" Sam Lee invited. Mrs. Dujduen guided her son up the stairs, and they took a seat on the balcony. Nattawut, the handsome young man, admired the garden full of flowers. "This is my son, Nattawut," Mrs. Dujduen introduced. Sam Lee looked at Nattawut with a hint of envy for his good looks. Just then, Tulya, holding her sneakers, was preparing to leave for work. She froze when she saw the guest on the balcony. "Tulya, greet Mrs. Dujduen, dear," her mother urged. Nattawut and Tulya locked eyes, and an electric charge seemed to pass between them. Nattawut immediately felt attracted to her. Tulya quickly turned her head, trying to shake off the strange feeling, as she was still hurt by love. "Hello, Mrs. Dujduen," Tulya greeted politely. "Are you going to work, Tulya?" Mrs. Dujduen asked sweetly. "Yes, I have to hurry since it's almost 8, Tulya replied, trying to appear rushed. Mrs. Dujduen pinched her son's waist. "Let Nattawut take you. You can travel in his car, and you'll arrive refreshed," Mrs. Dujduen suggested. Sam Lee and Han exchanged looks, regretting that Tulya wasn't willing to accept the proposal. It could have helped their family improve their situation. "It's okay. I still need to ride my bike home," Tulya declined, avoiding Nattawut's gaze. His eyes kept following her, and her heart started racing. She had never felt this way before. Not like this. Mrs. Dujduen looked disappointed, realizing her efforts might be in vain. "Oh. Okay then. Drive carefully, Tulya," she said. "Thank you. I'll head out now," Tulya said, slipping on her sneakers and running to her father's old car. She hoped that once she had saved enough, she could buy a new one, as the old car was a hassle to start and made her back ache. Nattawut couldn't take his eyes off her. He had fallen for her the moment he saw her. Love at first sight really existed, not just some vague saying. Tulya struggled to start the old car, but it refused to cooperate. She felt embarrassed and frustrated. "Let me help," Nattawut offered. Tulya got out of the car, panting, letting Nattawut take over. After a couple of tries, the engine finally roared to life, and Tulya smiled in relief. "It started," she exclaimed. Nattawut was also pleased, sharing her joy. He smiled, and Tulya looked up at him, and the electric charge seemed to hit her again. She was going to be late, for sure. She quickly thanked him and got back into the car. Once on the country road, she absent-mindedly placed her hand over her chest. "What's going on?" "No, don't. I'm not ready to love anyone right now," she thought to herself. If she fell in love again, it would probably end badly like before. She had to be cautious with love, for the rest of her life. Chapter 3. The salted egg shop owned by Jeliw had many regular customers. Today, Tulya was a bit late, which made Jeliw furious since she was the most skilled worker at the shop. "Sorry, J.E., the car had some issues today," Tulya immediately apologized, raising her hands in a gesture of respect. Jeliw waved a large fan at herself in frustration. "Why didn't you just take a motorcycle taxi?" Jeliw scolded. "Ugh, J.E., it's too expensive. 30 baht for one trip. My pay is only 300 baht. Round trip, that's 60 baht already," Tulya said with a resigned look. She was eager to get to work, but Jeliw placed her hand over her chest in exaggerated shock. "Hey, Tulya. Are you accusing me of being cruel? You think just because you're experienced, I won't dare fire you?" Jeliw shouted. "J.E., I didn't say that. I was just explaining," Tulya replied. "I don't care. I'm angry now. Get out of my shop. I'll hire new workers in your place," Jeliw barked. Tulya was stunned. She was being fired for something so trivial? "J.E., you're firing me just like that? Fine then, pay me for the 20+ days I worked before," she said, holding her hand out. "No payment. Once you're fired, you get nothing." Jeliw replied bluntly. "Then I'll report you to the police." Tulya shot back, infuriated. "Go ahead. I'm not afraid, my son works at the police station." Jeliw snapped. Tulya muttered insults in her mind as she walked over and pushed a jar of pickled eggs off the shelf, causing several jars to crash to the floor. Jelly's eyes widened in shock, and she screamed, "Tulya!" But Tulya wasn't satisfied. The sound of the shattered jars fueled her anger, and she continued to smash the jars without stopping. Crash! And crash! Ah! Someone stop this crazy girl. Before the male workers could rush over to stop her, Tulya ran to the front of the shop and stuck her tongue out at the cheating JLW. Heh. Go ahead and tell your son at the police station. Go ahead and report me. Ha ha ha. She quickly ran to her father's old car, started the engine, and revved it. Vroom vroom. The confident look on her face faded as the workers surrounded her, preparing to follow JLIW's orders. Tulya gave them a defiant smile just as JLIW came running toward her. Anyone who brings her down gets double the pay. JELIW yelled. Destroying the aged pickled eggs was a big insult, and the workers, hungry for money, quickly grabbed Tulya to pull her down. Hey! Stop! You'll knock over my father's car. Tulya yelled as they yanked her off. Crash! The car fell over just as Tulya was dragged in front of JLW, who was now itching to lash out. Tulya shut her eyes tightly, bracing for her fate. But then, I'll take 24 eggs. Wait, what's going on here? Tulya opened her eyes and saw none other than Suwat. She remembered him now. His family loved salted eggs because they said it was a cost-effective meal. How can they eat this every day? Suwat got off his motorcycle, and JLW quickly ordered her workers to back off, fearing she might be reported for assault. Just a little disagreement, JLW explained. Suwat grabbed Tulya's arm and helped her up. Tulya felt a bit grateful. At least he was being useful at this moment. I saw JLIW trying to hurt my girlfriend. What's going on? Suwat shouted angrily. Tulya felt a surge of pride. Finally, he was standing up for her. Listen. Your girlfriend destroyed my shop's property, which is worth almost 10,000 baht. If she pays for the damages, I won't take further action, JIW said, no longer acting concerned for Suwat's well-being. Suwat, who had been so protective moments ago, suddenly gulped. How much, JE? Suwat stammered. 9,000 baht, plus the cost of cleaning the shop. JELIW demanded. Ugh. What? But JLIW still owes me for my wages. Tulya said. I already told you. JELIW's shop doesn't pay employees who are fired. Suwat announced. He slowly walked back to his motorcycle. Wait, what? Come here. Tulya called out. I'm sorry, I have to go pick something up at Uncle Peek's shop. You guys talk it out, Suwat said, avoiding eye contact. Tulya was stunned. She couldn't rely on Suwat after all, could she? Suwat gave a cold smile and mounted his motorcycle, driving away. JELIW quickly turned to Tulya. So what are you going to do? She demanded. But Tulya was too exhausted to argue further. She slowly walked away, leaving JLIW in confusion. Hey, come back. Don't be so dramatic. JELIW shouted. Tears welled up in Tulya's eyes as she heard a car pulling up. She nearly stumbled as she tried to stop. Nattawut quickly got out of the car, his face filled with concern. Tulya, you need to come with me. Your father's condition is worsening, he said urgently. What happened? What's wrong with my father? Tulya asked, unable to believe what she was hearing. Was this a dream or was it real? Your father collapsed while we were there. We rushed him to the hospital. The doctor said he had a brain aneurysm and needs immediate surgery, Nattawut explained. Tulya was on the verge of collapsing. JELIW and her workers grabbed Tulya by the arms. You can't leave until you pay for the damages, one of the workers yelled. Damages? What damages? Nattawut asked, confused. Your girlfriend broke my shop's property. It's 9,000 baht. JELIW insisted. We're in a hurry. Let's talk about this later, JELIW, Nattawut said, pulling Tulya towards the car. JELIW stood there, completely helpless. The car sped off, leaving JELIW staring after them. Why did you let them go, JE? One of the workers asked. Because this guy isn't ordinary. He's the son of Mrs. Dujduen, the big moneylender. I've borrowed from her before, JLAW revealed. That was the end of the argument. The workers went back to cleaning the shop, and even the fallen car was carefully put back in place. No one dared to cross the son of the moneylender. Chapter 4. Mr. Han's condition was critical and he could end up paralyzed without surgery. However, the cost of the procedure was substantial, beyond the coverage of free medical care. Sam Lee cried loudly, as they might have to mortgage their house. Go ahead and perform the surgery. I will pay for it myself, Nattawut said. No one knew why Nattawut was being so generous, but both Tulya and her mother looked at him as if he were a god descending from the heavens. But Mrs. Dujduen pulled her son aside for a conversation. Are you crazy, Nat? The medical costs are in the hundreds of thousands. You can't be this generous. And besides, his daughter is not an option, Mrs. Dujduen scolded. But I feel sorry for her family, Mom, Nattawut replied. Nattawut's weakness was his sympathy. Mrs. Dujduen, although requesting Tulya to marry her son, only did so because she wanted someone to carry on the family name. If nothing was gained from this, she considered it a waste, as she had never given anything for free in her entire life. I will not allow this. If you're going to help, it must be in exchange for marriage, she insisted. But it's my money, Mom, Nattawut protested. Yes. And you're going to cut ties with me, right, Nattawut? Mrs. Dujduen demanded, her tone serious. Nattawut hesitated, knowing his mother's decisive nature. Suddenly, Tulya, who had overheard everything, stepped forward. Okay, I'll marry him in exchange for my father's medical treatment, Tulya said. Nattawut looked at her sympathetically. His love for her was pure, but he could see how much she was forcing herself into this marriage. It made him feel bad. You don't have to do it, Tulya. Let me talk to my mom first, Nattawut suggested. Nat, don't overthink it. Tulya has already agreed, and that's the decision. You're doing the right thing, Tulya, Mrs. Dujduen said, overjoyed, unlike her son, who was still unsure. Tulya, on the other hand, didn't say much. She had been disappointed by love, and now she was choosing money. At least it could save her father. It seemed like the best decision. I think I did the right thing. There's nothing else to do, she murmured, feeling unwell. Nattawut walked over and touched her forehead. She was burning with fever, probably from the shock about her father. I'll take her to rest first, Mom, Nattawut said. All right, go ahead. I'll speak with the officials myself, Mrs. Dujduen replied, letting her son take Tulya away. She then hurried to meet Sam Lee. Sam Lee, let's talk to the officials. We need to get the money to pay for the treatment, Mrs. Dujduen said, smiling widely. You're so kind, Mrs. Dujduen. If Tulya agrees to marry Nattawut, it would be a good thing, Sam Lee said, deeply moved. Mrs. Dujduen waved her hand dismissively. Don't worry about that. Tulya has already agreed to marry my son in exchange for her father's treatment, Mrs. Dujduen said. Sam Lee was taken aback. She had heard rumors about how Mrs. Dujduen never gave anything for free, but now it was clear. This wasn't just kindness. It was a transaction. She wanted to cry, thinking about her daughter's future in that household, but she couldn't dwell on it too much. The doctor had called to discuss the surgery, so she had to put those feelings aside for the time being. Meanwhile, Nattawut took Tulya to buy some fever medicine and snacks at a convenience store near the hospital. Then, he led her to sit on a marble bench by a small waterfall, surrounded by a peaceful and cool atmosphere. Eat some bread first, then take your medicine, he said. Tulya nodded, but she could barely eat a few bites of the bread. Can you try to eat a little more? The medicine will hurt your stomach if you don't, he coaxed, feeling deeply sympathetic. Today has been a lot to handle, Tulya sighed. Nattawut smiled, as if he understood the world better than she did. Life is like this, right? When time passes, we look back and think, hey, we've made it through, we've done well, he said. Tulya looked at him, feeling a strange connection. It felt like she had known him forever. Could he be her soulmate? Why do you want to marry me? Tulya asked. Well. Suddenly, Nattawut felt a bit embarrassed. Would she think he was silly if he told her the truth? I just feel good when I look at you. And well, I'm getting older every day, he admitted. And what about your mother? Why specifically me? Tulya asked. Don't worry about my mom, okay? Nattawut replied. No, I really want to know, Tulya insisted. All right, eat a couple more pieces of bread first, he said. Tulya reluctantly ate a couple more bites of bread before swallowing her medicine and tears. Both of them felt a little more at ease. My mom is just worried that I might find a woman who will take advantage of me, like the women who took advantage of my father in the past. And she's also a bit tight-fisted, Nattawut explained. Tulya nodded. I know someone who's even more stingy than your mom, and selfish too, she said, thinking of Suwat and his family. But my mom isn't that selfish. She's just been hurt by people taking advantage of her. She's been through a lot, Nattawut defended his mother. He wasn't lying. He knew how much his mother had suffered. His father had abandoned them for a new wife, and his mother had struggled to survive, eventually becoming a moneylender. But in the end, karma had caught up with his father. Chapter 5. Mr. Han underwent surgery and was treated just in time. His condition improved significantly over the next 4 days, but he still couldn't eat freely. He tried to ask about the medical bills, but both Sam Lee and Tulya agreed to keep the truth from him for now. Tulya smiled at her father and told him that in 2 weeks, she would marry Nattawut, the son of Mrs. Dujduen. Sam Lee's face immediately darkened, fearing that her daughter might be taken advantage of. Father, you need to dress nicely, and walk me down to the groom like in the movies, okay? Promise me, father, Tulya said. Though Mr. Han didn't know the details, he could sense that both his wife and daughter were upset. After all, the bond they had shared for so many years gave him a strong intuition. 3 days later, Sam Lee and Tulya went to the market to visit a wedding dress shop. However, the news of her upcoming marriage to Mrs. Dujduen's son had spread like wildfire and was distorted into something completely unrecognizable. To make matters worse, they ran into Kula, Suwat's mother, who was holding a basket of vegetables and mocking them. Hurry, hurry! Come see the gold digger woman. Suwat, my poor son, he gave everything for 5 years. As soon as she had no money to support her, she ditched him and is marrying a rich guy instead. This is what they call a gold digger. Kula sneered. The crowd around them grew, watching quietly. Sam Lee tried to pull Tulya away, but Tulya stood still, smiling back mockingly. Go ahead and get some salt from your son, Aunt Kula. What kind of man is he? Stingy, stingy, stingy. He even took more from his girlfriend than he would from his own money. And his mother is just as selfish, taking what doesn't belong to her. Wow, your family is so impressive, Tulya retorted. Her sharp tongue was as fierce as ever, but before she had kept quiet for the sake of her future. Now, with no reason to hold back, she let her anger out. Kula's face turned bright red. The townspeople were already skeptical of her because she had borrowed money from several local vendors without ever paying it back. Tulya's words hit hard, and the gossip about Kula only made her lose more credibility. What's going on, Mom? Suddenly, Suwat appeared. Seeing the confrontation with Tulya, he froze. Kula quickly ran to her son to report. That Tulya said our family is like leeches, sucking blood from others. Kula complained. Ah! Tulya, Suwat said, confused. Let's go, Tulya, Sam Lee urged, her heart sinking. She preferred a quiet life and hated the scene unfolding. Wait, Mom, Tulya said, pulling her arm away. She walked toward her former stingy lover, ready to speak her mind. I didn't call you a leech, but it's good that your mother exposed herself. And by the way, the 4,000 baht that you owe me, I want it back. I'm going to buy tissue for my wedding, Tulya said with a smile. Is the rumor true? Suwat asked, shocked. Yes, Suwat. 5 years of my life made me realize that I should end things with you. And if you think I'm a gold digger, maybe you should stop talking and keep quiet, Tulya responded. You've changed, Tulya, Suwat said, disappointed. Kula grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the confrontation. Don't bother, Suwat. Don't even pay her back the 4,000. Let her balk here, Kula said, dismissing the matter. Tulya and Sam Lee were stunned. Suwat was embarrassed, scowling at his mother before turning back to his ex. We'll send the money to you, but don't talk too much, Tulya, he said coldly. The mother and son walked away to their car, while Kula continued to shout, expressing frustration. Tulya and Sam Lee exchanged a look. It was clear, this chapter of her life was over, and she felt a sense of relief. Later, Tulya went to try on her wedding dress at Jey's shop. Jey asked endless questions while they measured and ordered the fabric. By the time everything was settled, Tulya was almost ready to collapse from exhaustion. Why do people always want to know everyone else's business, Tulya? It's strange, Samly remarked as they left the shop. They walked back home, as Mr. Han's old motorcycle was once again at the repair shop. It was going to need several parts replaced. Well, that's the nature of people, isn't it, Mom? They can't sleep if they don't know about other people's lives, Tulya replied. Well, Tulya, I'm so worried about you. I'm afraid Mrs. Dujduen might take advantage of you, Samly said, still uneasy. Don't worry, Mom. Nattawut seems like a much better person than Suwat. He'll probably be able to help me more, Tulya reassured her mother. Samly sighed in relief, though she was still a bit worried. I'm sorry for putting you in this situation, Tulya. If I had married Suwat, I'd be worse off, Tulya said with a laugh, trying to ease her mother's concerns. The two walked home, happy and relieved, despite the challenges they were facing. Over the next 2 weeks, Nattawut visited Tulya almost every day when he wasn't working. Sometimes they went ring shopping as his mother had instructed, other times they enjoyed a meal together. One day, while driving in Nattawut's car, they passed by Kula's house. Tulya rolled down the window, smirking in satisfaction as she gave a haughty look. Occasionally, she spotted Suwat riding his motorcycle to work. He gazed at her longingly, his eyes following the car until it disappeared from view. Nattawut, sensing her mood, smiled at her. Then he drove on, heading toward their destination, as Tulya felt a mix of emotions, but mostly relief, knowing her life was about to change for the better. Chapter 6. The wedding day arrived quickly, and the grand celebration was now over. The elders from both families accompanied the newlyweds to their wedding suite. Mrs. Dujduen chose to have the wedding night in her own house instead of the bride's home, which was something Samly and Mr. Han didn't object to. After all, they hoped that Mrs. Dujduen would show some kindness to their daughter, even if just a little. Nattawut gazed at his bride, taking in her beauty. But Tulya, feeling uneasy, walked to the window where she could see the wide river under the moonlight. His house was large and luxurious, a 3-story mansion. His office was on the 3rd floor at the end of the hallway, and their wedding suite was on the 2nd floor, while Mrs. Dudjuen's room was on the ground floor as she didn't want to climb the stairs. This area must be expensive. Over there are all big malls, Tulya remarked as Nattawut stood behind her, pointing out some of the vacant space. That area is for my mother. Some wealthy businessmen have offered to buy it for a huge price, but she refuses to sell. She wants to keep it for the family, Nattawut explained. Tulya felt strange with him standing so close behind her, as if he was trying to be comforting, but also made her feel unsettled. She shifted, but Nattawut placed his hand on her shoulder, urging her to stand still. Don't be afraid. I'm not a predator, he said softly. His voice had a certain huskiness that made her heart race. It dawned on her that he had married her, and tonight, he might expect something more as well. I'm not scared. Just feeling a little strange, she stammered. Have you ever kissed a man before? He asked suddenly. Why are you asking me that? She responded, surprised. He turned her to face him, looking deep into her eyes. Tulya quickly dropped her gaze to her feet, though the long wedding dress obscured her view. As I've said before, being near you makes me feel at peace. I want to be with you forever. You may not feel the same, and perhaps you'll think my words are old-fashioned, Nattawut said, smiling awkwardly at his own words. Tulya smiled softly. I never said that. And I actually like someone like you. Are you saying that for real, or just to please me? He asked, his voice gentle as his hands moved carefully to her shoulders, his touch delicate. I feel strange, she replied, feeling dizzy. Nattawut quickly caught her before she could fall. He lifted her up gently and carried her toward the bed. The room was elegantly furnished with all new items, although there were some old pieces used for tradition, such as the lamps. This is our special night, he murmured, his voice soft as he laid her down on the bed, surrounded by the sweet scent of roses that filled the room. His hands, rough from his work, carefully undid the buttons on her dress, taking care not to rush. He looked at her with such admiration, as if savoring every moment. She felt a wave of emotions, overwhelmed by the tenderness in his actions. He kissed her gently on the cheek, then on her lips, a slow, tender kiss that made both their hearts flutter. The connection between them grew, and she felt herself falling into the moment. Stay with me forever, Nattawut whispered. Yes, she answered, her voice soft as they continued to share that intimate connection, with each moment becoming more intense. As they moved closer, the room seemed to fade around them, and for a moment, everything felt surreal. The night was perfect, a night that would mark the beginning of their shared life. Outside, the sky was clear, with no clouds to block the stars and the moon. According to tradition, this was considered a propitious night, ideal for love and the continuation of the family line. Chapter 7. Life after marriage for the two of them was peaceful and calm, passing by quickly in 1 year. However, Tulya showed no signs of pregnancy. Despite Mrs. Dujduen, her mother-in-law, bringing her many remedies and nourishing treatments, there was still no sign of her becoming pregnant. This caused great frustration for both Tulya and Mrs. Dujduen. Meanwhile, Nattawut was the only one who seemed unaffected, still feeling happy and content with his wife by his side. He had no idea that a quiet tension was beginning to brew between his mother and his beloved wife. Neither of them showed any signs of discord when he was at home, but when he was away working, often for several days at a time, the tension grew. At first, it was just passive-aggressive comments, but soon Mrs. Dujduen began to insult Tulya's family background, leaving the young wife hurt and reluctant to return home. Things grew worse when Mac, Nattawut's relative, came to stay with them temporarily while he interned with Nattawut before moving abroad for work. He was younger than Nattawut, full of energy, with a bright personality. His charming smile, with dimples on both cheeks, made him seem incredibly lovable. Mac was also very attentive, knowing that Tulya loved books. He would often bring her new books, sometimes even romantic novels, which made her smile. Over time, Tulya grew accustomed to receiving them, but she never thought of him in any romantic way. However, things began to change when Max stopped bringing her books, as he had started dating someone else. "What's wrong? You look like a pufferfish," Nattawut said as he walked up to her, gently hugging his wife, who was standing by the balcony, gazing out at the river. Her expression was sour, and her cheeks puffed up in frustration. "I'm just lonely. I haven't been anywhere." "Your mother doesn't allow it," she replied with a touch of bitterness. Nattawut sighed. He did take her on trips when he had time, but sometimes work kept him busy for long stretches, leaving her stuck at home. "Mom just worries," he started, but his words seemed to die in his throat. At first, Tulya had appreciated his tendency to defend his mother, but after having more arguments with Mrs. Dujduen, she began to grow weary of hearing these words. "She's worried you might have an affair," Nattawut finished. "Ugh!" He felt uncomfortable but tried to hold her tighter. Tulya continued, sounding as though she needed to vent. "She's wrong. Just because she had problems with my father doesn't mean she should distrust me." "I know," Nattawut said quietly, trying to calm the situation. He loved both of them and didn't want them to be at odds. "Tomorrow, I'll take you out. We'll go wherever you want to go," he promised. Tulya turned to look at him, her long hair swaying, releasing the scent of shampoo that filled the air. She smiled warmly, her face and eyes lighting up. Nattawut let out a sigh of relief. "Really? I'd be so happy," she said. But when the news reached Mrs. Dujduen, she quickly intervened. "You can't go yet. Tomorrow, I'm taking Tulya to see a Chinese doctor. I've heard he's very good," she insisted. Nattawut glanced at his wife. She looked disappointed, but she didn't argue. At least she had always respected him in these matters, even if it hurt her. What he didn't know was that, behind his back, Tulya and Mrs. Dujduen often argued. It wasn't as quiet as it seemed in front of him. "It's been over a year. If this doesn't work, I don't know what else to do," Mrs. Dujduen seemed to mutter, implying that Tulya herself wasn't doing enough, making her feel helpless about finding another wife for her son. Tulya pressed her lips together. She felt more and more trapped, like a small bird in a cage, longing for freedom again. That night, Nattawut tried to cheer her up, playing soft music and trying to create a romantic atmosphere, but it felt flat. His efforts felt forced, and the connection between them seemed distant, lacking the warmth it once had. "Tulya, please don't be upset with my mother. She's just..." he began, but Tulya was too tired to listen. She sat up, her back stiff. Nattawut's heart broke, not wanting things to be like this. "I'm going outside for a moment," she said quietly. Nattawut nodded, allowing her to leave and gather her thoughts. Maybe some time apart would help things improve. His childhood experiences made him anxious. He feared feeling the same pain he had seen when his father had betrayed his mother. Although this situation wasn't exactly the same, he was still terrified of repeating the past. He lay in bed, waiting for his beloved Tulya to return, hoping that their love could be revived and that the future would bring them closer together, despite the struggles they faced. Chapter 8. The large, beautiful estate of Mrs. Dujduen had a wide front yard filled with various plants she had cultivated, and some were even gifts from friends. It felt like being in the middle of a lush garden, almost like a mythical paradise. "Hey, beautiful, come take a walk outside with me tonight," came a playful voice from behind. It was none other than Mac, the charming relative of Nattawut. Tulya was still upset with him for forgetting to bring her books, and she felt a bit betrayed by his actions. She was about to walk away when Mac continued teasing her. "Oh no. Mac's heart is broken. The cruel angel won't even look at him," he said dramatically. Tulya turned around, and his smile immediately softened her. She couldn't help but smile back. "Stop with the drama, Mac," she said playfully. Mac raised an eyebrow, confused by her words. "Drama? What's that, my lady?" he asked in a sing-song tone, pretending to be clueless. Tulya chuckled at his antics. "I don't even know, honestly," she replied. Just as she was about to walk away, Mac grabbed her hand. "I brought you a book this time. I promise you'll like it," he said eagerly. His eyes sparkled, and Tulya almost forgot her frustrations, caught in his charm. "Let's get it tomorrow. I don't want to argue with my mother-in-law right now. You know there are cameras everywhere," she said, sounding slightly annoyed. "How about one more try?" Mac asked, sounding almost pleading. "Where?" Tulya asked. "There's a spot here where your mother-in-law missed a camera," Mac said, grinning. Curious, Tulya followed him as he led her around the back of the house, through the lush plants, until they reached a secluded spot. "Ah, so this is where," she said as everything seemed to make sense. "Don't look at me like that," Mac teased. "I just like making friends with everyone." "Sure," she replied teasingly. "Well, I'll head back now." "Wait, I brought you here to a place where you can feel at ease. Just stay and talk for a bit," Mac urged, his voice soft and earnest. Tulya hesitated for a moment. "I've seen you with someone else already," she said. "It's nothing serious. It's not as fun as talking to you," he replied with a mischievous grin. Tulya's heart fluttered, and she couldn't help but feel a strange attraction. The way he looked at her made her feel something she couldn't explain. "I'm worried Nattawut might look for me." "I just said I'd take a walk," she said, thinking of her husband. Thinking of Nattawut made her heart beat normally again. Max smiled softly. "Well then, go ahead," he said. "Yeah. I'll see you tomorrow," Tulya said, turning to leave. But in her haste, she tripped over a tree root. Luckily, Mac caught her just in time, and they both stumbled, landing on the ground. Tulya found herself lying in his arms. She could feel his breath against her skin, and she was flustered. Max smiled warmly at her. "It's quite comfortable here, isn't it? This seat is guaranteed for safety," he joked. Tulya blushed and quickly pulled away, feeling embarrassed. Max sat up, and the two exchanged awkward smiles, the tension between them palpable. "Sorry about that," Tulya said, trying to break the silence. "It's okay, just don't hurt yourself," he said with a smile, his quick wit still showing. "If I had met you before Nattawut," Max said, his voice dreamy. Tulya quickly stood up before he could finish, feeling overwhelmed. She rushed back into the house and went to the second floor, to the bedroom she had once shared with Nattawut. Nattawut was still awake, sitting by the window, staring out at the river with a lonely expression. Seeing him like that, Tulya felt a pang of guilt. She walked up behind him and hugged him, burying her face in his back, like a child who wanted to make things right. He murmured. "Why aren't you in bed?" she asked, her voice soft and gentle. "I'm lonely. I've been waiting for you," he replied, turning to face her, brushing her hair aside tenderly. "I can smell the earth," he added. "Oh." She avoided his gaze. "I tripped outside." He looked concerned. "Are you okay?" Tulya quickly shook her head, throwing herself into his embrace, closing her eyes. I just missed you," she said, trying to push the thoughts of Mac out of her mind. Nattawut gently cupped her chin and leaned in to kiss her. For a moment, she felt as though she was kissing Mac instead, which confused her even more. Don't think like that, Tulya. It's me, Nattawut whispered. Tulya hesitated, then kissed him back with a passionate intensity that startled them both. It was a moment of deep emotion, and she felt a mixture of guilt and desire. After a long kiss, she led him to the sofa, and they sat there in a tender embrace, sharing the warmth they had longed for. But as the night wore on, Tulya couldn't help but think of Mac again, the feelings lingering in her heart. Chapter 9. Tulya's life seemed to take a turn as things between her and Nattawut became more complicated. It was clear that her emotions were conflicted, and she began to see certain things differently, with feelings she couldn't quite place. One evening, she found herself walking outside in the large garden of Mrs. Dujduen's estate. The garden was beautifully maintained with various plants, some cultivated by Mrs. Dujduen herself, others gifted by friends, giving it a sense of tranquility. "Beautiful woman, coming out to enjoy the evening air?" a voice called playfully. It was none other than Mac, the charming relative of Nattawut. Though Tulya was still annoyed that he hadn't been bringing her books lately, she couldn't help but smile at his mischievous nature. She was about to turn away but decided to stay and indulge his teasing. "Oh no! Mac's heart is broken. The cruel angel won't even look at him," he joked, making a mockingly sad face. Tulya turned back, finding his smile irresistible. "Stop with the drama, Mac," she said with a playful tone. Mac raised an eyebrow, pretending to be confused. "Theatrics? What's that, my lady?" he asked in a sing-song voice, his charm as evident as ever. Tulya couldn't help but smile, despite her annoyance. "I don't even know," she said, laughing softly. Mac, not wanting the moment to end, grabbed her hand. "I brought you a book this time. I promise you'll like it," he said eagerly. Tulya felt a wave of warmth but resisted the pull of his words. "I'll get it tomorrow. I don't want to argue with my mother-in-law tonight." "You know there are cameras everywhere," she replied with a hint of exasperation. "Just one more try?" Mac asked, his eyes gleaming with hope. "Where?" Tulya asked, curious despite herself. "There's a spot here where your mother-in-law missed a camera," Mac teased. Tulya followed him as he led her to a secluded area behind the house, pushing through the dense plants. She smiled as she realized where they had arrived. "Oh, so this is the spot," she said, understanding now. Mac laughed softly. "Don't look at me like that. I just enjoy making new friends." Tulya laughed lightly. "All right, I'm heading back. But I brought you here so you could be comfortable. Stay a little longer," he insisted, his tone soft. She hesitated but replied, "I've seen you with someone else. Don't you have plans tonight?" "It's nothing serious and I'd rather talk to you," Max said with a grin. Tulya's heart skipped a beat at his words, but she tried to brush it off. "I'm worried Nattawut might be looking for me," she said, thinking of her husband. Max smiled. "Well, then you should go ahead and join him." "Yeah. I'll see you tomorrow," Tulya said, turning to leave. But in her haste, she tripped over a root. Fortunately, Mac caught her just in time, and they both stumbled, falling to the ground. Tulya found herself lying in his arms. She could feel his breath on her skin and pulled away quickly, feeling embarrassed. "Sorry about that," she muttered, trying to compose herself. "It's okay," Max said, still grinning. "Just don't hurt yourself." Tulya stood up, brushing herself off, and they shared an awkward smile. "You're really good with words," she remarked, still flustered by the whole situation. Mac's eyes softened as he looked at her. "If I had met you before Nattawut, I think I would have fallen for you," he said, his voice sincere. Tulya quickly stood up, feeling her heart race. She had to get away before she allowed herself to think further. She hurried back to the house and went straight to her bedroom, where Nattawut was sitting by the window, gazing out at the river. Seeing him like that made her feel guilty, but she walked over and wrapped her arms around him from behind, wanting to make things right between them. Nattawut murmured, surprised. "Why aren't you in bed?" she asked softly, her voice full of affection. "I've been waiting for you," he replied, turning to face her, gently brushing her hair from her face. "I can smell the earth," he said, noticing something unusual. "Oh, I tripped outside," she said quickly, avoiding his gaze. He looked at her with concern. "Are you okay?" Tulya nodded, quickly embracing him. I just missed you," she said, trying to push thoughts of Mac out of her mind. Nattawut smiled, lifting her chin and leaning in to kiss her gently. Tulya kissed him back, but for a moment, she felt as though she was kissing Mac instead, and it left her confused. "Don't think like that, Tulya," Nattawut whispered. Tulya hesitated but kissed him again with a sudden, intense passion. When they pulled away, she felt a rush of conflicting emotions. Chapter 10. Cooking was quite a challenge for Tulya, but since she had promised, she was determined to give it her best shot. She spent some time watching cooking tutorials on YouTube before searching the fridge for some large shrimp. But her brow furrowed in confusion. "No shrimp, June?" she asked the helper in the kitchen. June shook her head. "What were you planning to make, Mrs. Tulya?" "Shrimp with salt, of course. It needs big ones," Tulya explained. "Would you like me to go to the market and get some?" June offered. "Would that be all right?" "I don't want to trouble you," Tulya hesitated. June smiled. "I have to go to the market every day anyway. I can buy them for you, and I'll even help with the cooking so you don't have to worry." Though Tulya wasn't used to being treated like this as the wife of a wealthy man, she nodded. She handed June 1,000 baht, telling her it was for the shrimp and any leftover change as payment for the effort. Just as she did, Nattawut returned home and crossed paths with June, who was on her way out with an umbrella, as it seemed like rain was coming soon. "Where are you going, June?" Nattawut asked. "I'm going to buy shrimp at the market." "Mrs. Tulya is going to make shrimp with salt," June replied. As June left, Nattawut smiled. He thought his wife was going into the kitchen to make dinner for him. Perhaps she wanted to fulfill her role as a wife to the fullest. "Tulya, you're going into the kitchen yourself?" he asked, walking up to her and giving her a warm hug. Tulya smiled weakly. "Yes, but I don't know if it'll turn out well," she admitted. "I'll eat anything, as long as it's made by my wife," Nattawut said warmly. Tulya smiled at him, but her thoughts weren't fully on him. She had intended to make it for someone else. She smiled a little less than usual. When dinner time arrived, everyone gathered around the table. Just in time, Mac came back. His eyes lit up when he saw the large shrimp dish on the table. "Wow! I'm so happy. Finally, my sister-in-law made this for us. Thank you so much. You're beautiful and kind," he said, his voice full of excitement. The room fell silent. Nattawut glanced at Tulya, his expression showing that he had many questions in his mind. "I made it for you, Nattawut." "It's no big deal," Tulya said quickly, trying to reassure him. Nattawut sighed in relief but still felt uneasy. Mac, on the other hand, had started to feel a bit awkward. "All right, I'll go wash my hands before I eat. I'm starving," Mac said, eager to change the subject. Tulya quickly served the large shrimp to Nattawut, and Mrs. Dujduen observed them closely, sensing something unusual. "Thank you," Nattawut said, still looking at Tulya with some unspoken questions in his mind. Mac returned to the table, carefully avoiding eye contact with both Nattawut and Mrs. Dujduen. Though the food was delicious, there seemed to be too many unasked questions hanging in the air. Nattawut, deep in thought, began to wonder if there was more to the connection between Mac and Tulya than met the eye. He remembered how Tulya had never shown an interest in cooking before and how she always preferred reading books. His mind started to race with doubts, but he couldn't fully understand why. Mrs. Dujduen, being a woman with experience, also began to form her own suspicions. She thought that things needed to be resolved quickly, one way or another. Mac, sensing the tension, realized that his careless comments might have caused more trouble than he anticipated. He wished he could take back his words, knowing that his charm was not enough to make everything right. The dinner continued in a tense silence. Tulya tried to enjoy the meal, but the weight of the situation was heavy on her heart. Nattawut's silence only added to the growing distance between them. When dinner ended, Tulya excused herself to go upstairs. Nattawut followed her, but before he could leave, Mrs. Dujduen called Mac to stay behind. "Wait, Mac. I have something to talk to you about." "Sit down for a moment," she said, her tone steady but cold. "Of course, Aunt," Mac replied, a little nervous. Mrs. Dujduen ordered June to prepare some tea or coffee, as it seemed there was going to be a long discussion ahead. June gave Mac a curious look, a mix of sympathy and concern. She quickly went to follow the order, knowing all too well that there were tensions in the house, especially with someone like Mac, who had been known to never fully commit. June had been with the family since she was 12, and after so many years, she knew the strong-willed nature of Mrs. Dujduen all too well. After hearing whispers and rumors from the other servants, she began to suspect that Mac wasn't as sincere as he appeared. She knew that he had a reputation for being a charming flirt, someone who never stayed with anyone for long. She couldn't help but feel that he had intentions that didn't align with the family's values. Tonight, it seemed, would be a long one. Chapter 11.1. That night, the rain that had threatened to fall since the afternoon finally began around 9 p.m., gently tapping on the roof of the garage below. Tulya sat in the rocking chair, gazing out the window, her heart heavy with emotions. The sound of soft footsteps came from the bathroom. She turned quickly toward Nattawut, who gave her a small smile and spoke softly. "Your cooking was delicious. Would you consider cooking for me again sometime?" Suddenly, Tulya burst into tears. She felt guilty for unknowingly allowing herself to be kind to another man instead of focusing on her husband. She stood up and walked toward Nattawut, who opened his arms, ready to embrace her. The two of them hugged tightly, and just as she was about to speak, he beat her to it. "Tomorrow, we'll go to the beach together. Just the two of us. Your mother already gave permission." The music from the sound system filled the air, blending with the light sound of rain. He gently took her hand, guiding it to his shoulder, while he placed his hand on her waist with a soft touch. "The music is playing. Let's dance," he suggested. Tulya nodded through her tears, and though her dancing was awkward and out of rhythm, she tried to follow his lead. She kept stepping on his feet, but Nattawut patiently smiled. "Dancing takes time," he said kindly, kissing her forehead, then moving to her cheek and finally her lips. He pulled away and smiled, adding, "It's just like marriage. No path is ever smooth all the time." Tulya froze, feeling a mixture of emotions. His words were a lesson wrapped in dance, and his kiss felt like both a comfort and a reminder. It pained her more than any physical punishment could. A good partner is someone who listens, who gives opportunities, and changes course when necessary. Opportunities are important, but they aren't always easy to come by, he continued. Tulya closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely. He gently pulled his hands away, wiping her tears with his fingers. "Tomorrow, we'll get back on the right path," he whispered. He didn't wait for her response. His answer was clear in his eyes, in his actions. No more excuses or reasoning needed. Later that night, as Nattawut held her, Tulya remained awake. She thought she heard the sound of a car leaving the large mansion of Mrs. Dujduen. Her heart raced, and Nattawut, sensing her unease, placed his hand gently over hers as if to comfort her. "I'm okay. Really, I'm fine," she whispered to him, unsure if he heard her, but needing to say it anyway. It took almost an hour for her to fall asleep. When the rain finally stopped and the cold air took its place, she wrapped herself tightly in his arms, seeking warmth. He was there, ready to hold her close, offering comfort whenever she needed it. Chapter 11.2. Even though Nattawut had already brought one bag down, the maid still had to carry another one to the car. Tulya looked at her in surprise. "Don't forget to take the Chinese medicine," Mrs. Dujduen, still in her comfortable pajamas, said seriously. This was important, and she would remind her every time it was time to take it. "Yes, I won't forget. I'll bring it to you for sure," Tulya reassured her. "Don't just talk, do it," Mrs. Dujduen added firmly. Last night, she had arranged for her nephew to go to Rayong to sort out some issues, hoping that her son's marriage would return to peace soon. "How many days will we be gone, Nattawut?" Tulya asked. "Well, Mom says we should go for 2 weeks," he replied, finishing loading the car. Tulya raised her eyebrows in surprise. 2 weeks? I should probably say goodbye to my parents first. They'll miss us, she said, hastily making her way to Mrs. Dujduen to bid farewell. Have a good trip, Nat. I've already had the people there clean the house, Mrs. Dujduen said. Tulya thought to herself as she walked toward the car. Mrs. Dujduen seemed to have everything. It was as if she was incredibly wealthy. We're going to which beach? Tulya asked. Phuket, Nattawut replied. Mom has a place there. Your mom is very wealthy, she said in awe. It amazed her how one woman could create so much. Mom is incredibly strong. Her heart is pure gold, Nattawut said, speaking with admiration. Tulya let him speak, knowing by now that he wasn't exaggerating in the least. The off-road vehicle drove up to a beautiful wooden house surrounded by colorful flowers. Mr. Harn and Mrs. Sam Lee quickly came out to welcome them. Just seeing their daughter's face brought them joy. Tulya, you're going to be gone for so many days. I hope everything goes well, Mrs. Samlee said warmly. Yes, Mom. But if anything happens, please call me any time, Tulya replied quickly, not wanting her parents to feel too shy to call. Of course. I hope you'll give your father grandchildren soon, Mr. Harn said, lovingly patting his daughter's head. He was still deeply moved by her decision to marry a wealthy man for his safety. By the way, Tulya, I don't think you've heard the news about Suwat's family? Mrs. Samlee seemed like she was about to tell something significant. What's going on? Tulya asked, eager but also hesitant to prolong the conversation. Don't waste her time, Mr. Harn interrupted, signaling for his wife to stop. All right. We'll talk about it later. It's not really something that concerns us anyway, Mrs. Samlee added quickly. Tulya was disappointed but reluctantly said goodbye to her parents before they departed. Even as she sat in the car, she still felt uneasy about what she hadn't been told. Is something wrong? Nattawut asked, noticing his wife's troubled expression. No, it's nothing. Just some thoughts on my mind, she replied, not wanting to worry him. Would you like to share? Nattawut gently asked. I don't think I can. My mom just hinted at something, but didn't explain much, Tulya explained. Nattawut nodded in understanding, but as they neared the end of the street, a figure suddenly stepped in front of the car. Nattawut had to slam on the brakes. Damn it! Nattawut shouted, his voice filled with frustration. Tulya quickly opened the door to see the man standing in front of their car. Suwat! She exclaimed. Suwat quickly stood up and rushed toward her, but Nattawut, who had just gotten out of the car, stepped in front of him protectively. What's going on here? Nattawut asked, concerned. Suwat, help me, I'm in trouble, Suwat pleaded. Nattawut looked at Tulya for her opinion. What's going on? Is Suwat okay? Tulya asked, though her concern was mixed with curiosity. It's my mom. She borrowed 2 million from a loan shark and lost it gambling. Now they're threatening to kill us, Suwat explained, looking distressed. Tulya's heart softened as she listened, and Suwat continued. They even took Suji and are planning to sell her. If we don't come up with the money, Suji will die. Tulya felt sympathy for him, and turned to Nattawut, who could read her thoughts. How much more do you need? Nattawut asked. Suwat's face brightened with hope as he explained, 1.5 million. I've raised that much already, but they won't accept it. I think you should take a shower and eat something first, Nattawut suggested. You'll think more clearly after that. I don't know what to do. I'm worried about my mom and sister, Suwat said, his eyes filled with despair. Tears began to well in Suwat's eyes. Tulya immediately turned her face away, feeling conflicted. I'll lend you the money, but you need to sign a contract, she said firmly. Suwat's eyes lit up with gratitude, and he quickly grabbed Nattawut's hand, thanking him profusely. Thank you so much, Suwat said repeatedly. Tulya sighed in relief, feeling a sense of affection for her husband, who had made this decision to help despite the complications. But you have to promise me, Suwat, that you'll go eat and change into fresh clothes before you do anything else. You need to be nourished and clear-headed, she added. Okay. Thank you so much, Tulya. You're so lucky to have Nattawut. He's the perfect match for you, Suwat said, with admiration in his voice. Tulya smiled faintly. At least Suwat's misfortune would serve as a lesson for him and his family. The plane was now descending toward Phuket Airport. The couple walked arm in arm, pulling their luggage toward the waiting car that would take them to their resort. They passed both domestic and international tourists, and Tulya couldn't help but marvel at how much she had never experienced before. Nattawut turned to her softly. Shall we eat first or rest? He asked. Tulya felt a mix of emotions bubbling inside her. She leaned her head against him as they sat in the car. I want to rest, but I also want to soak in the hot tub, she said, her voice almost a whisper. Her fingers gently brushed his chest, and she could feel him breathe more quickly. Once we change the atmosphere, you'll feel better, Nattawut said, as he leaned closer to kiss her gently. Tulya closed her eyes and inhaled his scent, feeling a sense of comfort and closeness. Nat, I want to be with you, she whispered, her voice soft. Of course, we'll have a nice bath first, Nattawut said, smiling. Tulya smiled in contentment. Their private car drove into the luxurious resort, a secluded beach that offered them privacy and peace, the perfect place to relax. Chapter 12. The End. That night, there was a dance while they dined. Tulya, dressed in a beautiful one-shoulder dress, was dancing with Nattawut, who was wearing an elegant suit. Looking back, she couldn't believe she had let herself stray from him. The food on the table was special, with additional items like oysters. There was sparkling wine and whiskey for those who preferred it. "Are you okay tonight?" Tulya asked playfully. "For you I'd die in your arms and still be happy," Nattawut replied. They both laughed, sharing some playful and cheeky conversations. As they ate oysters with all the side dishes, Tulya's face turned even redder. "How do you think I'll handle my first glass of wine?" Tulya asked, her voice soft. "I'll make sure to support you through it," Nattawut quickly reassured her. "You're the sweetest. If you ever betray me, it would hurt more than anything else in the world," Tulya said, her tone half joking, half serious. It was true. Nattawut was incredibly handsome, rich, and intelligent, while she had only her beauty to offer. Beauty was something everyone could attain these days. He took her hand, as if he knew exactly what she was thinking. "The moment I saw you, I thought I might stand my ground against my mother, but then I realized my soulmate had already arrived," Nattawut said, his words sincere. "As time passes, when you're older, when your skin becomes wrinkled." Nattawut trailed off, noticing that the wine was starting to make her a bit emotional. "I'll probably be more wrinkled than you," he continued with a laugh. "But you're a man. And you're rich." "Oops," Tulya added quickly. Nattawut gently placed his finger on her lips, his eyes locking with hers, as if asking her to stop. "Stop worrying about things that haven't happened. I believe we can make our marriage work with love, forgiveness, and understanding," he said, his voice calm and confident. Tulya nodded, and she kissed his hand lightly. "I love you. You've made me feel like the most valuable woman in the world," she whispered. "Shall we dance?" he asked with a smile. "I really like this song." "Are you not afraid I'll step on your feet?" Tulya asked teasingly. Nattawut shook his head. "I'm not afraid. I'm happy to guide you," he replied. And so, they danced together, just like any other couple. Some couples were men with men, embracing each other tenderly. The music played romantic melodies, setting a beautiful mood. Tulya tried her best to dance, even though no one danced quite like she did. "Just relax. It's okay to step on my feet. I'm happy to lead you," Nattawut said, reassuring her. "Are you sure?" Tulya asked. "Definitely, my dear," Nattawut responded with a smile. Amidst the lights and the soft music, they danced gracefully, surrounded by couples who seemed to have stepped out of a royal ballroom. Tulya smiled, feeling content, both with herself and with her fate. She might have been a woman who had known love's struggles, but with a man like Nattawut, she had found someone willing to give love and opportunity without any conditions. She only hoped that this vacation would bring the happiness they all sought, in every possible way. Subscribe now for more interesting stories.